Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Limitless edX podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the great homework debate, necessary evil or outdated tradition. So let's dive in. My name is Jeanette Easton from Refound Education, and we also have the lovely.
I'm Andrea Harris from Bloom at Home Learning.
So, Andrea, what do you think about homework?
Well, anyone that knows me, anyone listening who has known my teaching over the years knows I have never advocated for homework ever, ever, ever. I think it's the most ridiculous thing. But I will preface because there are some caveats to this too. So we always have, like in education, every teacher has those parents that are asking what they can do for homework or when there is homework. There's a lot of, especially different cultural backgrounds, have the expectation of homework. Like the kids get home from school and they're just expected to do an hour or two of homework a day. I think it's ridiculous because we're putting kids in school from 9:30 or 9 until 3:30 every single day. And there's a lot of fluff, which also spills into homework. Like my objective with every parent that I work with is to really get to the bottom of what they want their child to learn. Like, what is this lesson looking like? What is the goal of it? Because there's a lot of fluff that we give to kids that doesn't necessarily have any specific learning outcome. And when you're doing that, it's just make work, right? And as we all know as adults, if we're sitting in a workplace and they're just giving you stuff to do and there's no actual point to it, you're going to lose interest. And it's like the biggest way to kill children's enthusiasm with learning, especially into the junior grades too. And especially nowadays as well. I think it's far better to have parents who are enthusiastic to do extra things with their kids to advocate for maybe music lessons or art lessons or different things that you can expand into sports like gymnastics or hockey or football or like any kind of thing. Dance is a huge thing too. Anything that your child is interested in, I always would advocate do that instead. That's what a lot of gifted learners families do as well, is that they expose them to all different types of like super cool creative things that they could get into that they probably don't get that deep into in school. And in terms of like their loves, like exercise, sunshine, sports, all of that is so great. So I never advocated for homework. I think it is a very silly thing. However, I will say project-based learning is really awesome for spurring kids' enthusiasm with learning and really having them dive deeper into their own interests. So I do a lot of that with my current like tutoring students where they could like dive into things that they're really, really interested about. And it doesn't have to be part of the curriculum. So I love that. So that in a sense, I think is very different from homework where a child may be working on something that they really love at home instead of the expectation. When we first came to the States, too, it's actually shocking how much homework they give kids. Like they have the expectation to do 2 to 3 hours a night of homework. And this is like starting in middle school or even kindergarten. I had parents telling me about how their kids are bringing home worksheets in kindergarten. Like, what is the point of that? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Should you be working with your child in kindergarten, reinforcing handwriting? No. But the best thing that you can do, I always would advocate to parents, is read a story before bed. Read to them. I think reading is such a huge thing that parents overlook, and it's so simple. But oftentimes now, with technology and cell phones and being so busy in every other area, that gets overlooked, and it's really not a huge priority among families today. And it's honestly one of the number one ways that you can increase your child's literacy development is just reading stories with them.
I love what you said. So essentially in practice, I did the same thing. Some parents, you're right, they do really want a homework for their kids. And I had to explain to them my one homework piece was reading. And I had to explain to them that it is the information age. If they cannot be an effective reader, it will have an impact on their success because it is what it is. And a lot of them started feeling that. And having reading as homework, even as like for 5 minutes before bed. I didn't start off with anything complex, just write how many minutes and whatever title. And even that practice writing the title was practice with their writing. That like these very small acts that people overlook actually build up. There's a compound effect, just like with money, right? There's a compound effect when they do these little acts on a daily basis. And I had grade 2 and 3 that were finished reading assessments by the end of the year just by reading on a daily basis, starting with 5 minutes. That was like bare minimum expectation. And I just encourage them as a rule of thumb, like every week, add 1 more minute. And I'm like, it's not necessary, but try and see how much you can get. And then we started setting goals. And then we had like at the time a piñata, and they would put something in the piñata every time they reached their goal.
That's super cute. I think you bring
And
up a really good point too, is like just the consistency in it and
yes.
just the commitment to do it, right? So, in terms of like, and kids love it. Kids love reading with parents. It doesn't matter their ability. They love, love, love it. And the other thing is it's free. It's completely free. You could go to any library at school, they bring home books all the time. Or you could go to your local library and just withdraw a whole bunch of books and have your child choose it by interest, or you could choose it by themes that are coming up. I mean, like Christmas is coming up. You can choose a whole bunch of books about that and have your child learn about it, or have it again be interest based. So if they are really interested in something like coding, you can get a whole bunch of coding books out. It doesn't necessarily have to be at their level, but if you're reading with the child, then it's just that one-to-one connection time that they really love and they thrive on it. Stories before bed are always such a huge hit. And even for students who are, or children who are like in middle school, you can read chapter books together. That's how you can start introducing those themes. And then you're a part of what they're learning. And even trading off in reading. Sometimes I do this with my students that are not struggling, but they're finding reading challenging, is if you take turns reading a sentence or two, then you can really get to know the areas that they need to work on as well. So I think that's a huge component of parents wanting to do more at home. That's the easiest. It's free. It doesn't take a lot of time. I mean, just even 20 minutes. 4 days a week is helpful, and you get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of seeing successful results from that in children.
Oh, for sure. And you want to hear something funny?
Yeah.
So I used to like undercover do training for parents because a lot of them are not trained in education, or maybe their creativity in that area is a little lax. And it's nothing personal. It's like we all lack creativity in certain areas. It's like,
Mhm.
so what I used to do, one option is having like a monthly calendar with like a menu of different activity ideas. And it doesn't always have to be difficult. Even sometimes I would have like a menu of car games. So car ride games, things like I Spy, and then use these small off the cuff opportunities as like a homework opportunity, but you have to like find different words or letters as you're driving and signs, something to increase awareness. If they're younger, like something to do with like colors or whatever their capacity is, but just like expanding on what homework means. It could mean anything. It could be doing a recipe and looking at the measurements. It can mean anything. It doesn't have to cost anything. Like you said, going to the library to get books versus purchasing books, or just doing these small acts and the compound effect.
I think that's great to reframe it, right? Everyone thinks of homework as in, no one really enjoyed doing that. Like, if we're honest, when we were younger, did you love to do homework? No. But just reframing it into ways to learn at home, there are so many different ideas that are so much fun, and the kids love, love, love to do them. And it's connection time with your children, but we're just not calling it homework. I do want to preface, though, Jeanette, because I do know that many parents of teenagers listen to us as well, and they're going to be like, Andrea and Jeanette, what about high school years? Now, that does change things, because I do feel like the material is much more complex, and there are times where you do have to practice things. So, for example, if you're using or learning complex things in math for trigonometry, you're going to need to practice those things. But I don't think it necessarily has to be in terms of homework. I think if a teacher is effective, normally in any type of lesson, you can introduce the concept, you can do some practice questions together, and then you can give students independent work time to be able to work on it on their own. Now, there are always going to be chatty students who don't get it done in that time frame, but that would be the trade-off on personal responsibility. If you're not getting your work done in a certain time frame, then that is an expectation that you have to get it done at some point to understand it.
And I think with older kids, you can learn how to work smarter, not harder. So
Mhm.
say, for example, they have to do, I don't know, some kind of reading. They have to read a novel, and you can always input the novel into like an AI and then have like an AI platform. And they have a lot of new learning platforms, and they will auto generate short notes, kind of cards flashcards, so you can practice. So even as parents, you can look at strategies to work smarter, not harder. So not necessarily focusing on the content, but how can we learn new things using some new tools to make our lives easier? How can we, just learn one strategy? Like how do we like note taking,
Mhm.
like the act of, how to work out do you know that I learned how to work an agenda and manage scheduling in college?
Really? Would have
Nobody.
been a helpful skill earlier on.
Nobody sat with me. But you know what? It did give me, I started doing those activities with kids in elementary school.
Hmm.
And I did a complex version with children in high school. Like you have a part-time job, it's this many days a week, you have this is how much homework you're averaging. And then we would problem solve with your schedule, how you would balance it out. And, or, there's just so many things that you can do with older kids, or even like social issues. Like when you're little, it's very black and white. That's good, that's bad, share. It's very basic kind of um social concepts. But as you get into high school, the shades of gray, um, in terms of like behavior, it becomes more complex, and teenagers don't know what to do.
Definitely. I think you bring up a really good point about like agenda and just managing your own personal accountability for timing. Those are huge things to be able to actually like teach and model kids, just as it would be like you want to model reading. So parents that are saying, but my children don't like reading books. Well, do you read books in front of them? So them being able to see us practice what their expectations are or new things to incorporate in their own learning is really helpful. I will say that um, just even modeling getting into flow, when you're doing something that you just absolutely love and the time flies by and it's like time doesn't even exist when you're doing it, just really advocating and being a huge support system to getting into those moments a lot more, as opposed to like the regimented, now you have to do your science homework, now you have to do your math homework, now you have to do this, now you have, like, I think in terms of like, a calendar is really helpful because kids all love to see what's coming up in calendars. And any parent who is a parent of a child who's really young know that they love to see how many sleeps until this event. But in terms of like even high school students, calendars can be really, really helpful as opposed to managing everything by minutes or hours instead of just looking at like the big perspective of these are the things that I would like to get done in December. These are some of my learning goals, and just look at it in a more flexible option as opposed to being like a slave to the time limit you have to spend on it.
Ooh, I love that. Teaching them. Adults have to learn this as well. I'm a macro thinker. So macro is like big picture, micro is like in the details. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, their brains operate in different ways, but we all kind of actually complement each other based on our perspectives. But we still have to learn to look at things on a bigger picture or a smaller picture, depending on where you pull towards. But just teaching kids, like, this is my large goal. How do I break it down into smaller goals? And you can teach them those kinds of things, and just really break it down. And you can do
Absolutely.
one thing a week or once
That's
every
actually,
2 weeks.
you know what, from a micro view, that's actually what teachers teach students to do when they're having difficulty sounding out a word. Like you could look up any word. Usually, I always like to pull up pharmaceutical terms because they're so long, but you can show them like even adults can't sound that out properly. You have to chunk it. So even at the very smallest micro level, students or children need to be taught to read difficult words by chunking it into pieces. And then as a macro view, you do so much better in terms of organizing your time into chunking it into pieces. When we have goals, it's very hard and oftentimes like really complex for little minds or even teenagers to think of like, how am I going to reach that giant goal without being able to know how to like divide it into this is step one, this is step two. These are some steps I'd like to get done this weekend towards this goal. And I think that prepares them for real life circumstances so much more than, working through a workbook on grammar or
Oh,
handwriting.
oh, for sure. Although I do think grammar should come make a strong comeback. I do know that, like, AI and everything. I got criticized for teaching grammar, but honestly, the kids' writing was so bad that we did very little grammar every day, but the 15 minutes we did every day improved their writing so dramatically. But it is kind of, it's one of
I
those
think I
very,
think we're getting into like totally I agree, but I
sorry,
think
I went on
it's
a tangent.
no, I'm laughing because it's personal preference. I don't think a lot of parents are going to do that. And I'm
True.
laughing because my oldest daughter, she just graduated from high school in June and like so many students were using AI to write essays and stuff. So it's like up and coming. It's something, obviously, we know kids always take over technology and they learn it so much faster than adults. Like, adults don't even have a clue what they're able to do right now to get out of doing homework. So they're going to find ways to cheat the system. Why are you just not providing more reasonable expectations and fun things that would benefit them in the long run, as opposed to like, again, like the make work things that are like tickety boo, you have to write an essay on Shakespeare on this. Do some fun things instead.
Yes. It's funny because so they came out with, you could write something in AI.
Yeah.
Then they had come out with this software to identify whether it was created by AI. So then teenagers created something that would actually counter the ability for it to be tracked.
I know it's a constant game instead of just
True.
like they're always going to win. Teenagers will always win when it comes to technology. They're faster.
They're very crafty,
Yeah,
and very smart. But you know what? If they have the capacity to come up with shortcuts,
right? Let's
and
use that.
yes, you know what? Encourage kids to. I remember I had this rule where they weren't allowed to come to me unless they tried to solve it themselves. They had to tell me what
Mhm.
they did to try and solve it themselves. They had to ask a friend, and they had to say what they tried with their friend. And then the third option would be come to me for some, supportive problem solving. And of course, there are rules around that. If there's bleeding in the head around the head or anything that's like excessive, obviously that's a one-stop shop. But there were certain problem solving things, they'll call your name a million times a day. And these kids came up with some MacGyver style problem solving that I was like, what? Like, they were
Right?
creating inventions. They were like, if you actually put it on them to solve, because kids will choose laziness over anything else. But if you kind of give them a little motivation, and of course, then you shout out to everybody like, excuse me, genius moment.
Yeah.
You kind of,
I think kids don't choose laziness. I think they totally choose the things that they're interested in,
yes,
but you're giving them an outlet. I love
challenge.
that example because you were honoring what they're super awesome at, right? Like look at even escape rooms right now, right? If you have a team of children in there, there's going to be emerging leaders and ones that think totally outside the box, which is exactly what we need.
Mhm.
So in terms of like homework, oh my goodness, this is another really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Um, Teach them about their brain and how their brain works and how to keep your brain healthy is a huge thing moving forward because obviously we know that about the tech piece, right? Like social media and like having access to a cell phone and all of that is obviously no one disputes it, making our children much more unhealthy. And with everything going on in the world, it's not always happy news. In fact, the news is always fear based and negative. So, in terms of giving them homework, why not establish healthy habits instead of homework? So, one of the things I always had suggested to my students, like, and this goes back to like 2003, before I was even a mom, I had a student that was very obsessive compulsive. Like he was diagnosed with many, many different things, including Tourette's and oppositional defiant disorder at that time, and um, ADHD, a whole bunch of things, but he would perseverate on all of the really like terrible things that happened every single day. And truth be told, because adults would tell him every day, don't do this, you're doing this too much. Stop doing that, right? So they perseverate in all the like and ruminate on all the really horrible things that they do, which only increases shame and guilt. When in reality, I taught him to reframe his brain at that time and say, like, you need to, before you go home every single day, please write down the three things that you did really well today. And just like focusing more on the good things. And nowadays, like that child thrived in that situation. He didn't want to do it at first for the first, like, maybe week, 2 weeks, I was really pulling teeth and I was giving him examples of what to do. But once he started doing it, he loved it. He like actually went home one day without remembering to tell me the three things, and he ran all the way back to school to tell me. And it like made me cry. I loved it
Oh,
so much. But it's just reframing our children's brains. So if you are going to give them tasks to do at home, why not focus on the things that are actually going to keep them healthy for their entire life? Another thing I always recommend is keeping a gratitude journal. So, did you know, Jeanette, the part of our brain that focuses on gratitude is also the part of our brain that controls anxiety? So, when you switch to gratitude, it's actually physically impossible to feel anxiety at the same time. So that's why there are a lot of mental health advocates and studies that show just even focusing on gratitude, making a gratitude journal right before bed every single night. It doesn't have to be a long sentence for kids that are reluctant writers, but just even writing down two or three things that you loved and then adding things. And if it's been a really bad day, maybe you could write down, I saw a leaf or a flower that I really liked, or this person smiled at me. It can be really micro things, but in the grand scheme of things, you're actually training children and teens to be able to create healthy habits for their brain instead of the mess that we have right now in society on really unhealthy coping mechanisms.
I really love that because it, you're so right. You can just break it down into, even if they just tell you with their voice, you know, their thoughts or whatever, the gratitude, what they feel gratitude or, you know, something positive. Sometimes it could be the smallest act. It doesn't have to be the writing, but just expressing yourself and explaining to them what that does to your brain is such a big deal. How many kids ask why? Like, why do
Yeah.
I need to know this? When you actually explain to kids the benefit, they are more likely to be invested. Like, you know, I used to do a wonder wall and they'd be like, why are we doing this? It's like, well, I want you to learn how to research a project. So as you get older, you're going to have an idea. So what do you do with that idea? It's just going to fall flat. So what's the starting point? You know, like brainstorming and, you know, like it's more about walking them through the process. And kids don't know. People expect them to just know things. You have to walk them through from beginning to end some of
Mhm.
the thought that's behind, like, first I'm going to do this because I need to know this, then I'm going to do this. And it's not always so linear, but then as things become harder as they get older, they'll know some just basic foundational skills that need to happen. Like, explain to kids.
Oh my goodness, you bring up such a good point. And you know what I just thought of too? That is so huge. Every single parent needs to do it. Honestly, it is of the utmost importance right now is teaching kids how to research and knowing good sources. Because right now, what we're finding, what I found at least, was unisources in school that are telling you all the same thing. But in reality, there are many different search engines that we could use. There are many different ways of finding out information. And it not only gives them perspective, but it helps to talk politically about what we're seeing, right? Like it's not so, every issue does not need to be so politicized. Like, I mean, there are some very, very factual things that we could get into woke ideology right now and how people twist facts and call you conspiracy theorists. But in terms of like even just looking up information and being educated yourself before making decisions is huge. Like look at what we saw with the I'm going to say the word vaccine mandates and just in people's inability to look into different examples of things themselves just leads way to our kids need to think critically. They need to be taught how to look at these things and research without blindly following somebody who doesn't necessarily have their own individual best interest at heart.
Yes, the art of debate. And you do not have to go into any kind of political realm with children, but even
No,
having them like in favor of having homework versus not having homework. Having like we need to be able to like there are people that I see that I agree with some of the things they say, but I don't agree with other things that they say, and I'm fine with that because we're not all going to agree on everything 100% of the time. That's completely unrealistic. Just being able to stay regulated with yourself.
mhm.
Because people, you have to could be able to control your emotions when you're having like a heated debate, because that's if you want to show signs of maturity, being able to have eloquent discussion and just being okay with like,
Self-regulation is a huge, huge thing that every parent could work on with their child. Honestly, every adult needs to work on that right now, too.
you are you're telling the truth. But even starting to implement those strategies with self-regulation, like my kids will blow out candles, like pretend their fingers are candles, and we work on our breaths together, or just walking through some of those strategies, and that could be a homework piece. And don't feel overwhelmed by what we're saying. Break things down in the smallest of ways. You could just have start with the reading every day, and then once every few weeks or once a month, even do one, maybe a project, or maybe focus on, and just get it to snowball until you develop your own habits around
I
what
love that.
you and your family feel comfortable with in terms of home.
Even life skills, like you
Yes.
mentioned, making a recipe together. And like we said, if you're having a calendar with where you have a family meeting and everyone writes down some things that they would like to do that month. If you're going to incorporate baking or cooking, then that's a great way to get kids into meal planning as well. Like they can help. And then they can eventually, if you have set the framework and then you've done this from an early age, not even that you have to do it from an early age, but if you set the time up where you're working with them even just once a week for them to help prep meals, then they can eventually take over in a few years and develop their own and make dinner. It's all of these like little responsibilities that they have to do as adults and teenagers as well, where you can just incorporate that into learning at home. It doesn't have to be sitting down to learn history.
Ooh, I love that. Silent labor. I think
Yeah.
every parent should sit down with their kids and have them call when they're old enough, obviously, but especially like in high school, they call to make their own appointments. Walk them through, like, yeah, just
Yeah.
basic like conversational skills when you're calling, like, hello, my name is so and so. I need an appointment. How often do your appointments come up? Do you need physio? How do you, that's silent labor. Every person, male, female, I don't care about traditional roles, but everybody should be able to do the silent labor necessary to function in life. And kids, it's very new to them, like to make their own call. What do I say? What if they say this? And if you're holding your hand through the initial process, they're going to be able to speak with more confidence, and just, I remember I would tell kids to go into like go knock at a door and deliver something that needed to be delivered. And some of them would be like, oh no, I cannot just knock on a door. I'm
I
like, what do you
love
think they're
that.
gonna do? Attack you? Just
Just
go.
even, right? Even instilling
Yes.
confidence and like just loving your kids unconditionally for the things that they are doing and working on things that they need to improve on in just small steps because like all of us have things that we could work on and when you do it in little bit increments it just goes so much smoother than if you have that expectation all at once. So I think these are all great, awesome learning at home examples instead of framing it as homework. And I do think that we need to touch on the fact that if parents are feeling overwhelmed by homework, conversations with the school system, like in terms of there's teachers always that are going to be like the homework teachers, just having conversations with them can help that as well. But hopefully we've given you tons of ideas that you can start incorporating at home, regardless of whether you're in the school system or looking into alternative education to just help your kids along the way.
Absolutely. And we will come at you with some more options. Something we didn't discuss is financial literacy, but that is going to be a topic in future. So keep listening and be sure to go to www.limitlessedx.ca. You can send us a text message or an email, and we'll be sure to cover any topics that you bring to our attention. So thank you so much, everyone.